Beneath the vast canvas of night, where countless stars pierce through the velvet darkness like ancient eyes, watching over the world, we find ourselves standing at the edge of time itself, where the golden sands of Egypt stretch endlessly toward horizons that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Here, in this timeless desert, where the wind carries whispers of forgotten prayers and the echoes of pharaohs who once ruled with divine authority, we invite you to settle into the embrace of stories that have shaped the human understanding of life, death, and the mysterious forces that govern both. If you find yourself drawn to these ancient tales, consider letting this journey be your companion through the quiet hours, and perhaps share this moment of discovery with others who seek the solace of timeless stories. The great river Nile flows like a ribbon of life through this landscape of memory, its waters reflecting not only the stars above, but the profound myths that once gave meaning to every sunrise, every harvest, every birth and death along its fertile banks. And mortals, but reflections of the deepest truths about existence, woven into narratives that served as both comfort and warning to those who gazed up at the same constellations we see tonight. In the shadow of pyramids that stand as eternal monuments to human ambition and divine connection, we discover that the gods of ancient Egypt were never simple figures of pure light or absolute darkness, but complex beings whose stories reveal the intricate dance between creation and destruction, love and betrayal, order and chaos that defines all existence. The myths that emerged from this sacred land speak to something fundamental within us, something that recognizes the beauty and terror that coexist in every moment of life. As we prepare to journey deeper into these tales, imagine yourself as one of those ancient travelers who might have walked these desert paths under the guidance of storytellers whose voices carried the wisdom of generations, whose words painted pictures more vivid than any fresco on temple walls. The stories of Ra, Osiris, and Isis are not distant legends, but intimate explorations of the human condition, dressed in the magnificent robes of divine drama, yet speaking directly to our own experiences of love, loss, transformation, and the eternal quest for meaning in a universe that can seem both nurturing and terrifyingly indifferent. Tonight, as the desert wind carries the scent of sand and time across the landscape of memory, we begin with the recognition that these myths emerged from a people who lived intimately with both the life-giving power of the sun and the mysterious realm of death, who understood that every dawn was a victory over darkness and every sunset a reminder of mortality. The gods they created in their stories were not distant, perfect beings, but reflections of the complex reality they experienced daily, where the same river that brought life could bring devastating floods, where the same sun that nourished crops could become a merciless destroyer. The ancient Egyptians gazed up at the night sky we share with them across millennia, and saw not empty space, but a vast theater where cosmic dramas played out nightly, where the gods fought battles that determined the fate of the world, where every star was a point of light in a story that gave meaning to human existence. Their myths were maps of the soul, guides for navigating the treacherous waters between life and death, between order and chaos, between the known and the unknowable. As we settle into these stories tonight, let them wash over you like the gentle flooding of the Nile, carrying with them the sediment of ancient wisdom and the nutrients of timeless truth, preparing the ground of your imagination for the seeds of understanding that these tales have planted in human consciousness for thousands of years. The air grows cool now, as desert air does when the sun releases its hold on the day, and in this cooling darkness, we find ourselves ready to encounter the first of our divine figures, a god whose very nature embodies the fundamental paradox of existence itself, whose story reveals how even the brightest light casts the deepest shadows. Ra emerges from the eastern horizon of our tale, like the sun itself, bringing with him the promise of illumination and the threat of destruction in equal measure. For he is the great paradox of Egyptian mythology, the god who brings life through light, yet carries within his radiance the potential for annihilation. To understand Ra is to understand the fundamental duality that the ancient Egyptians saw in all existence, the recognition that creation and destruction are not opposing forces, but aspects of the same divine power. Each morning, as Ra begins his celestial journey across the sky, he does so not as a simple bringer of light, but as a complex figure whose radiance serves multiple purposes, warming the earth and enabling life, while simultaneously burning away impurities and enforcing cosmic order through the sheer intensity of his presence. The ancient myths tell us that Ra's daily voyage was never a peaceful glide across blue skies, but a constant battle, a journey fraught with dangers that threatened not only his own existence, but the continuation of all life. The golden solar bark that carries Ra across the heavens is crewed by gods and blessed spirits, yet even with such divine protection, the journey remains perilous, for the forces of chaos never rest, never cease their attempts to plunge the world back into the primordial darkness from which creation first emerged. As Ra moves from dawn to dusk, his light changes, transforming from the gentle warmth of morning to the fierce intensity of midday, then softening again toward evening, each phase revealing different aspects of his nature and different challenges he must face. But it is in the night, when Ra descends into the underworld, that his true complexity reveals itself. For the underworld journey is where the sun god must confront not only external enemies, but the darkness within himself, the shadow aspects of divine power that daylight conceals. The 12 hours of night correspond to 12 stages of transformation, 12 opportunities for both triumph and failure, 12 tests that determine whether the sun will rise again or whether darkness will claim dominion over the world. In the depths of the underworld, Ra encounters Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, whose very existence represents everything that opposes order, light, and life. This is not a simple battle between good and evil, but a cosmic struggle between the forces of creation and entropy, between the drive toward complexity and meaning and the pull toward dissolution and meaninglessness. Apophis is enormous beyond imagination, his coils stretching across the underworld like a living mountain of malevolent intent, his eyes burning with the desire to return all existence to the void from which it emerged. The battle between Ra and Apophis is fought not once, but every single night, for chaos is not something that can be permanently defeated, but a force that must be continuously overcome, a reminder that order and meaning require constant vigilance and effort to maintain. Ra's victory is never guaranteed, never easy, and the myths make clear that there are nights when the battle is closer than others, when the forces of destruction come perilously close to succeeding in their goal of cosmic annihilation. Yet Ra possesses weapons and allies that make him formidable in this nightly conflict, for he carries with him the accumulated prayers and offerings of millions of believers, the collective will of all those who depend on his light for their existence. His solar disk becomes a weapon of tremendous power, capable of burning through the coils of chaos and illuminating even the darkest corners of the underworld. While his voice carries the authority of absolute cosmic law, the power to command reality itself. The ancient Egyptians understood that Ra's struggle was also their struggle, that the battle between light and darkness played out not only in the cosmic realm, but in every human heart, in every choice between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, between love and hate. They saw in Ra's daily death and resurrection a pattern that governed all existence, a reminder that nothing good comes without effort, that light must be earned anew each day through struggle and sacrifice. As Ra travels through the underworld, he encounters not only enemies, but also the souls of the dead, those who have completed their earthly journey and now seek passage to the afterlife. For some, Ra's presence brings comfort and guidance, his light illuminating the path toward eternal rest. But for others, his radiance reveals the weight of their earthly deeds, the shadows they carry within themselves that must be addressed before they can find peace. The transformation that Ra undergoes during his underworld journey is profound, for he enters the realm of death as the dying son of evening and emerges as the reborn son of dawn. But this resurrection comes at a cost, requiring him to confront and integrate the shadow aspects of his own nature, to acknowledge that even divine power carries the potential for both creation and destruction. This nightly death and rebirth of Ra became the foundation for Egyptian understanding of the afterlife. The recognition that death is not an ending but a transformation, a journey through darkness that, if successfully completed, leads to a new form of existence. The pharaohs who ruled Egypt identified themselves with Ra, claiming to undergo the same nightly journey and daily resurrection, positioning themselves as the human embodiment of the cosmic principle that Ra represented. But Ra's story contains within it a warning as well as a promise, for the myths make clear that divine power, no matter how benevolent its intentions, can become destructive. When pushed beyond certain limits, when the balance between creation and destruction tips too far in either direction, there are tales of Ra's anger, moments when his frustration with human weakness and rebellion caused him to unleash forces that nearly destroyed the very beings he was meant to protect. The eye of Ra, that fierce aspect of his power that could see into the hearts of mortals and judge their worthiness, sometimes burned with such intensity that it threatened to consume everything in its gaze, requiring other gods to intervene and restore balance before cosmic order collapsed entirely. These stories served as reminders that even the most necessary and beneficial forces in the universe could become dangerous if not properly understood and respected. As we follow Ra's journey from the brightness of day into the depths of night and back again toward dawn, we begin to understand that his story is really our story. That the battle between light and darkness that he fights nightly is the same battle that plays out in every human life, every human choice, every moment, when we must decide whether to embrace the difficult work of creation or surrender to the easier path of destruction. The ancient Egyptians who told these stories understood that life itself was a journey through alternating periods of light and darkness, joy and sorrow, hope and despair, and that the key to navigating these transitions successfully lay in recognizing that both aspects were necessary, both served important purposes in the larger pattern of existence. Ra's complexity as a divine figure reflects the complexity of existence itself. the recognition that the forces that sustain us are the same forces that can destroy us, that the difference between blessing and curse often lies not in the force itself, but in how we relate to it, how we position ourselves in relationship to powers greater than ourselves. In the deepest hours of night, when Ra's battle with Apophis reaches its most intense moments, when the outcome seems most uncertain and the darkness presses most heavily against the boundaries of creation, we find ourselves approaching another figure whose story intertwines with Ra-S in ways that reveal even deeper truths about the nature of divine power and human experience. Osiris enters our tale not as a distant god, but as a figure whose humanity shines through his divinity, whose story speaks directly to our own experiences of love, betrayal, death, and the hope for something beyond the grave. If Ra represents the cosmic principle of light struggling against darkness, Osiris embodies the more intimate drama of life struggling against death, of order, attempting to maintain itself in the face of chaos, of love persisting despite betrayal and loss. The reign of Osiris over the living world was remembered as a golden age, a time when the natural order functioned harmoniously, when the Nile flooded at the proper times, when crops grew abundantly, when justice prevailed over violence and wisdom guided human affairs. Osiris was not merely a king, but a teacher, showing humanity the arts of civilization, the cultivation of grain, the brewing of beer, the establishment of laws that protected the weak and maintained social harmony. Under his rule, Egypt flourished as it never had before, and would never again, for Osiris possessed that rare combination of strength and gentleness, authority and compassion, that marks truly great leaders. He governed not through fear or force, but through the love and respect of his subjects, who saw in him not a distant autocrat, but a wise father, whose every decision was made with their welfare in mind. Yet even in this golden age, shadows gathered at the edges of paradise, for Osiris had a brother whose heart burned with envy and resentment, whose nature seemed designed to destroy everything that Osiris had built. Set looked upon his brother's success and popularity, and saw not something to celebrate, but something to possess, not an achievement to emulate, but a throne to steal, not a beloved sibling, but a rival to eliminate. The betrayal of Osiris by Set represents one of the fundamental tragedies of human existence, the way that love and trust can be weaponized against us, the way that our greatest strengths can become the very vulnerabilities that our enemies exploit. Osiris trusted Set because he loved him, because he could not imagine that a brother could harbor such murderous intent, because his own nature was so fundamentally good that he could not recognize the depth of evil that had taken root in Set's heart. The method of Set's betrayal reveals his cunning and his cruelty in equal measure, for he did not attack Osiris directly in battle, where his brother's strength and righteousness might have prevailed, but instead used deception and trickery, exploiting the very trust and love that made Osiris vulnerable. The elaborate coffin that Set crafted, beautiful and perfectly fitted to Osiris's measurements, appeared to be a gift of brotherly affection, but was actually an instrument of murder, a trap disguised as a blessing. When Osiris climbed into the coffin, trusting in Set's apparent goodwill, he sealed his own fate. For Set immediately closed the lid and cast the coffin into the Nile, sending his brother to what he believed would be certain death. But the ancient myths tell us that death is never as simple as it appears, that the journey from life to death, and potentially back to life again, involves transformations that the living cannot fully comprehend. The coffin containing Osiris's body floated down the Nile like a seed carried by the current, bearing within it not just a corpse but the potential for rebirth, for transformation, for a new kind of existence that would transcend the limitations of mortal life. The river that Set intended as Osiris's grave became instead the means of his brother's preservation, carrying him away from the immediate danger of Set's fury and toward a destiny that even Set could not have anticipated. When the coffin finally came to rest, it did so in a foreign land, where it became incorporated into a great tree that grew up around it, as if nature itself recognized the sacred nature of what lay within and sought to protect it from further harm. The tree grew with supernatural speed and beauty, becoming so magnificent that it attracted the attention of the local king, who ordered it cut down and used as a pillar in his palace. Thus, Osiris came to rest in the heart of a royal palace, hidden within a pillar that supported the very structure of earthly power, a fitting metaphor for the way that his influence would eventually support the entire Egyptian understanding of death and rebirth. He was dead, yet not dead, absent, yet present, powerless, yet somehow still exerting a profound influence on the world around him. The discovery of Osiris's body by Isis begins another chapter in this tale of love and loss. But it also marks the moment when the story shifts from tragedy toward the possibility of redemption, from death toward the hope of resurrection, from the triumph of chaos toward the restoration of order. Isis's love for Osiris transcends death itself, becoming a force capable of challenging the very boundaries between life and death, between the possible and the impossible. Yet, even as we anticipate Isis's intervention in this cosmic drama, we must linger for a moment longer with the image of Osiris in his coffin, floating down the Nile toward an uncertain destiny. For this image captures something essential about the human condition, something about the way that our greatest defeats can become, through forces beyond our understanding, the foundation for our greatest victories. The death of Osiris was not merely the end of a golden age, but the beginning of a new kind of hope, a demonstration that love could transcend death, that justice could survive betrayal, that order could emerge from chaos if we are willing to undertake the difficult work of reconstruction and renewal. His story reminds us that some victories can only be achieved through apparent defeat. Some truths can only be learned through loss. Some forms of life can only be attained by passing through death. As the ancient Egyptians told and retold this story, around their fires in the desert night, they found in it not just entertainment, but wisdom, not just tragedy, but hope, not just a tale of gods, but a reflection of their own struggles with mortality, injustice, and the persistent human dream that death might not have the final word in the conversation between existence and oblivion. In the gentle movement of the Nile's current, carrying Osiris toward his transformation, we see the same force that would carry Isis toward her greatest challenge and most profound triumph. For the river that was meant to be a grave would become instead the pathway to resurrection, the means by which love would prove itself stronger than death, and wisdom more enduring than violence. The story of Isis begins in grief, so profound that it seems to shake the very foundations of the earth. Yet from this grief emerges a power more transformative than any the world had ever seen, a magic born not of arcane knowledge, but of love so pure and determined that it could reshape reality itself. When word reached Isis of her beloved husband's fate, when she learned that Set's treachery had robbed her of the one person who gave meaning to her existence. Her response was not despair, but action, not resignation, but a fierce determination to undo what seemed irreversible. The search for Osiris's body becomes an epic journey that takes Isis across the known world, following rumors and signs, consulting oracles and wise women, leaving no stone unturned in her quest to recover what Set had stolen. This is not the passive grief of a victim, but the active sorrow of a woman who refuses to accept that love can be so easily defeated, that justice can be so permanently thwarted, that the bonds between souls can be severed by something as crude as murder. Throughout her search, Isis displays qualities that elevate her beyond the typical role of mourning widow, revealing herself as a figure of tremendous power and wisdom, capable of magic that rivals that of any god, possessed of a will that proves stronger than death itself. She moves through the world like a force of nature, bending reality to her purpose, calling upon powers that most beings can only dream of possessing, yet always motivated by the most fundamental and human of emotions. When Isis finally locates Osiris's body embedded within the pillar in the foreign king's palace, she must use all her cunning and magical ability to recover it, without arousing suspicion or causing political complications that might interfere with her ultimate goal. The myths tell us that she took service in the royal household, gradually winning the trust and affection of the queen through her wisdom and kindness, slowly positioning herself to claim what was rightfully hers. The recovery of Osiris's body marks only the beginning of Isis's true work, for Set's malevolence extends beyond mere murder to a kind of cosmic vandalism, a determination to make resurrection impossible by destroying the very physical foundation upon which it might rest. When Set discovers that Osiris's body has been recovered, his rage drives him to an act of desecration so thorough that it seems to make any hope of restoration completely futile. The dismemberment of Osiris's body into 14 pieces scattered across the length and breadth of Egypt represents Set's attempt to make his brother's death not just permanent, but absolute, to destroy not only life, but the very possibility of life's return. This is destruction taken to its logical extreme, the kind of malice that seeks not just victory, but the obliteration of everything that might preserve the memory or possibility of what has been destroyed. Yet Isis meets this ultimate challenge with a patience and determination that transforms grief into power, sorrow into wisdom, love into magic, capable of performing the impossible. The search for Osiris's scattered remains becomes a pilgrimage that sanctifies the entire land of Egypt. For everywhere that Isis travels in her quest becomes holy ground, blessed by her tears and consecrated by her devotion. One by one, Isis recovers the pieces of her beloved, and with each discovery, she performs rituals of preservation and protection that gradually restore not just the physical form, but something of the spiritual essence that animated it. This is not merely the work of a skilled magician, but the labor of love itself, the demonstration that some bonds are too strong to be broken by violence, some connections too deep to be severed by death. The magic that Isis works over Osiris's restored body transcends anything previously known in the world, for it is magic born not of learned spells or inherited power, but of emotion so pure and focused that it becomes a creative force in its own right. She breathes into the assembled remains not just life, but a new kind of existence, a form of being that partakes of both mortality and divinity, both earth and heaven, both time and eternity. The resurrection of Osiris through Isis' magic becomes the foundation for all Egyptian understanding of death and rebirth, the proof that love can triumph over hate, that creation can overcome destruction, that life can emerge victorious from its battle with death. Yet this victory comes at a price, for the Osiris who returns is not the same figure who once ruled the living world, but a transformed being whose domain has shifted from earth to the underworld, from the realm of the living to the kingdom of the dead. This transformation reflects one of the deepest insights of Egyptian mythology, the recognition that some victories require sacrifice, that some forms of life can only be achieved by accepting death, that some kinds of power can only be exercised from positions that the world considers defeat. Osiris's resurrection is real but different, his return to life complete but changed, his triumph over death absolute but costly. As Isis performs the final rituals that will establish Osiris as Lord of the underworld and Judge of the dead, we see in her face not just the joy of success, but the sorrow of separation. For the husband she has restored to life cannot return to the world of the living, but must take up residence in the realm of shadows, ruling over a kingdom that she cannot share while she remains bound to the world above. The love between Isis and Osiris transcends even this separation, becoming a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, a connection that makes communication and commerce between these realms possible. Their love becomes the foundation for Egyptian funeral rites and burial practices, the assurance that death is not the end of relationship, but a transformation of it, not the severing of bonds, but their translation into a different key. Yet, even as we celebrate Isis's triumph over death and chaos, we cannot ignore the cost of this victory, the way that love's greatest achievements often require sacrifices that test the very limits of what we are willing to endure. Isis has won back her beloved, but she has also accepted a form of eternal separation, a love that can only be expressed across the boundary between life and death, between the world of sunlight and the realm of shadows. In her patient gathering of Osiris's scattered remains, in her meticulous restoration of his body, in her magical restoration of his life, Isis demonstrates that some tasks cannot be hurried, some victories cannot be achieved without extraordinary patience and persistence. Some forms of love require a commitment that extends beyond any reasonable expectation or conventional understanding. The magic that Isis wields is available to all who love as deeply as she loves, who commit as completely as she commits, who refuse to accept defeat as readily as she refuses. Her story suggests that the greatest magic is not found in ancient spells or mystical knowledge, but in the willingness to persist in love, even when love seems impossible, to continue hoping, even when hope appears futile, to keep working toward restoration, even when destruction seems complete. As Isis completes her great work and establishes Osiris in his new role as ruler of the dead, the cosmic balance that Set's actions had disturbed begins to stabilize. But this stabilization reveals that chaos has not been defeated, but merely contained, not destroyed, but temporarily constrained. For Set himself remains active in the world, his malevolent energy seeking new outlets for expression. The figure of Set emerges from the shadows of this tale, not as a simple villain, but as a complex representation of forces that exist within nature and human nature alike, forces that serve necessary functions, even as they cause tremendous pain and destruction. energies that cannot be eliminated but must be understood and properly channeled if cosmic balance is to be maintained. Set embodies the principle of disruption that prevents stagnation, the force of change that breaks up patterns that have become too rigid, the energy of destruction that clears space for new forms of creation. Yet in Set's story, we see how these necessary forces can become twisted when they are driven by envy, resentment, and the desire for power rather than guided by wisdom and cosmic purpose. The jealousy that motivated Set's betrayal of Osiris reveals the shadow side of family relationships, the way that proximity can breed resentment as easily as love, the way that shared origins can become sources of competition rather than cooperation. Set looked upon Osiris's success and saw not an inspiration but a reproach, not a model to emulate but a standard that made his own achievements seem inadequate by comparison. This jealousy transformed Set into a force of pure destruction, driving him to acts that served no constructive purpose, but were motivated entirely by the desire to tear down what others had built, to possess what others had earned, to destroy what he could not create. The murder of Osiris was not a means to any positive end, but an expression of rage that had festered until it became the defining characteristic of Set's entire existence. Yet even in his malevolence, Set serves a function in the cosmic order, for his opposition to harmony and his disruption of established patterns force other gods and mortals to develop strength, wisdom, and resilience they might never have discovered in a world of perpetual peace and ease. The challenges that Set presents become opportunities for growth. His obstacles become chances to develop capabilities that would otherwise remain dormant. The ancient Egyptians understood that Set represented forces within themselves and their world that could never be completely eliminated, but had to be continuously managed energies that could be destructive if left unchecked, but could also be channeled toward constructive purposes if properly understood and directed. Set was not evil in any absolute sense, but rather misdirected energy, power without wisdom, strength without purpose. The storms that Set commanded reflected his nature perfectly, for storms can be utterly destructive, devastating crops and destroying homes. Yet they also bring necessary rain and clear the air of impurities, serving essential functions in the larger patterns of weather and climate. Set's role in Egyptian mythology parallels this natural phenomenon, representing forces that are dangerous but also necessary, destructive but also cleansing. In the vast desert regions that were his domain, Set ruled over a landscape that was hostile to human life, yet served important functions in the larger ecosystem, providing minerals and metals, creating boundaries between fertile regions, serving as a testing ground where only the strongest and most adaptable could survive. The desert was not empty wasteland, but a different kind of fullness, not the absence of life, but life in its most austere and concentrated forms. Set's relationship with the other gods reflects the complex dynamics that exist within any family or community. The way that opposing personalities and conflicting goals can create tension that either destroys the group or, if properly managed, strengthens it by forcing everyone to clarify their values and commit more deeply to their purposes. Set's challenges force Ra, Osiris, and Isis to discover reserves of power and wisdom they might never have accessed in a world without opposition. The battles between Set and the other gods are not simple conflicts between good and evil, but complex negotiations about the nature of order, the proper balance between stability and change, the question of how much disruption a system can absorb without losing its essential character. Set's rebellions force these questions into the open, demanding answers that might never have been formulated if everyone had simply accepted the status quo. Yet Set's story also serves as a warning about what happens when the necessary forces of change and challenge become corrupted by personal resentment, and the desire for power when opposition to established order becomes motivated not by vision of something better, but by rage at being excluded from current arrangements. Set's transformation from cosmic principle to destructive force illustrates how quickly necessary energies can become dangerous when they are driven by ego rather than guided by wisdom. The ancient myths suggest that Set's fate is neither complete victory nor total defeat, but ongoing tension, continuous struggle, perpetual negotiation between the forces of order and chaos, creation and destruction, stability and change. This reflects the Egyptian understanding that cosmic balance is not a static condition, but a dynamic process. Not a problem to be solved once and for all, but a responsibility to be continuously fulfilled. In the red desert sands that were sacred to Set, in the fierce winds that carried his presence across the landscape, in the lightning that split the sky during thunderstorms, the ancient Egyptians saw reminders that the forces of disruption and change are woven into the very fabric of existence, that any attempt to create perfect harmony must account for the persistent presence of elements that resist harmony, that challenge order, that demand continuous attention and response. Set's legacy in Egyptian mythology is not simply that of a defeated enemy, but of a permanent challenge, a reminder that the work of maintaining cosmic order is never finished, that the victories of love over hate, creation over destruction, wisdom over ignorance must be won again and again in each generation and in each individual heart. As we move deeper into the night and farther into these ancient stories, we approach the realm where Set's disruptive energy encounters the transformed power of Osiris, where the forces of chaos meet the authority of divine justice, where the dead are judged and the eternal fate of souls is determined according to principles that reflect the cosmic struggle we have been witnessing. The underworld ruled by Osiris stands as the ultimate testing ground for the values and choices that define mortal existence, the place where the true consequences of life's decisions are finally revealed, where the masks that hide our authentic selves are stripped away and we stand naked before the scales of divine justice, carrying nothing but the weight of our deeds and the truth of our intentions. In this realm of shadows and judgment, where Osiris sits upon his throne as the resurrected king of the dead, we discover that death is not the end of the story, but its culmination, not the cessation of existence, but the moment when existence reveals its true meaning, not escape from consequences, but the final accounting for everything we have done and failed to do during our brief sojourn in the world of the living. The journey that every soul must make through the Egyptian underworld begins not with death itself, but with the moment of recognition that death approaches, when the dying person must begin to prepare for a transition that will test everything they believe about themselves and their relationship to the cosmic order. This preparation involves not just practical arrangements for burial and preservation of the body, but a deeper kind of readiness, a spiritual preparation that requires honest assessment of one's life and genuine commitment to facing whatever judgment awaits. The ancient Egyptian understanding of death as a journey rather than a destination reflects a sophisticated recognition that consciousness does not simply cease at the moment of physical death, but continues in a different form, subject to different laws and facing different challenges than those encountered in mortal life. The underworld is not a place of rest, but of activity, not a static heaven or hell, but a dynamic realm where souls must actively participate in their own salvation or damnation. As the deceased soul begins its journey through the underworld, guided by spells and prayers from the Book of the Dead, it encounters a landscape that is both familiar and utterly alien, populated by beings that are both helpful and threatening, governed by laws that are both just and terrifying in their absolute authority. This is a realm where symbolism becomes reality, where metaphor takes on physical form, where the abstract principles that governed moral life in the upper world become concrete forces that must be navigated with wisdom and courage. The various chambers and passages of the underworld represent different stages of purification and testing, different opportunities for the soul to demonstrate its worthiness, to join the company of the blessed dead, or reveal its corruption and face the consequences of a life poorly lived. Each encounter with the guardians and judges of the underworld requires the soul to recite specific formulas, demonstrate particular knowledge, and prove its understanding of cosmic law through word and deed. The heart of this underworld journey is the famous weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased must face Osiris himself in his role as supreme judge of the dead, surrounded by 42 assessor gods who represent different aspects of moral law and cosmic justice. This is the moment of ultimate truth, when all pretense and self-deception fall away and the soul stands before divine authority, carrying nothing but the authentic weight of its earthly existence. The feather of Mat, representing truth and justice, sits on one side of the cosmic scales, while the heart of the deceased is placed on the other. And in this simple image, the ancient Egyptians captured one of the most profound insights about the nature of moral existence: that our deeds have weight, that our choices have consequences, that the universe itself cares about how we have lived and treats us accordingly. If the heart proves lighter than the feather, weighted down by no unrepented sins or unresolved cruelties, the soul is welcomed into the company of the blessed and granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise where all the joys of earthly existence continue in perfected form, where the Nile always floods at the proper time, where crops never fail, where loved ones are reunited and sorrow becomes a memory of a distant past. But if the heart proves heavier than the feather, burdened by the accumulated weight of selfish actions, cruel words, and missed opportunities for kindness and justice, then the soul faces a fate more terrible than simple annihilation, for it is devoured by Ammit, the composite monster whose crocodile head, lion's torso, and hippopotamus hindquarters represent the most feared predators of the Egyptian landscape. Ammit's consumption of the unworthy soul represents not just punishment, but cosmic recycling, the return of corrupted spiritual energy to the primal chaos from which it originally emerged, the undoing of the individual personality that proved unworthy of continued existence. This is not temporary punishment that might eventually lead to redemption, but final judgment, the ultimate consequence of a life that chose selfishness over service, cruelty over kindness, falsehood over truth. Yet the ancient myths make clear that this dreadful fate is not arbitrarily imposed, but is the natural consequence of choices made during earthly life, the inevitable result of patterns established through years of moral decision-making. The soul that faces Ammit has, in a very real sense, chosen this fate through countless small decisions that gradually shaped its essential character. Just as the soul that passes through judgment successfully has earned this victory through a lifetime of choices that aligned it with cosmic truth and justice. Osiris's role as judge of the dead represents his transformation from beloved king of the living to something far more complex and powerful. A figure who embodies both mercy and justice, both compassion and absolute moral authority. He understands the challenges and temptations that face mortal beings, because he was once mortal himself. Yet he also represents standards that cannot be compromised, principles that must be upheld even when upholding them causes pain. The court over which Osiris presides is not a place of arbitrary punishment, but of perfect justice, where every soul receives exactly what it has earned through its earthly choices, where mercy is available to those who have shown mercy and justice is meted out to those who have ignored justice in their treatment of others. This is cosmic law operating with mathematical precision, moral cause and effect revealed in its purest form. The underworld journey also reveals the profound Egyptian/insight that death is not a solitary experience but a community event, that the soul's passage through judgment affects not only its own eternal fate, but the cosmic balance that determines the welfare of all existence. Each soul that successfully passes through judgment strengthens the forces of order and truth, while each soul that fails weakens the foundations upon which the entire universe rests. The prayers and offerings made by the living on behalf of the dead serve not as attempts to bribe divine justice, but as expressions of love that actually provide spiritual energy to help souls navigate the challenges of the underworld journey, the connection between the living and the dead remaining full, creating a community that spans the boundary between life and death, between the world of sunlight and the realm of shadows. In the quiet depths of the underworld, where Osiris holds court surrounded by the symbols of his earthly kingship and his divine authority, we find reflected all the themes that have woven through our journey into Egyptian mythology: the struggle between order and chaos, the power of love to transcend death, the importance of justice in maintaining cosmic balance, and the recognition that every individual choice contributes to the fate of the entire universe. The figure of Osiris on his judgment throne reminds us that accountability is woven into the very fabric of existence, that our actions matter not just to ourselves and those immediately around us, but to the cosmic order itself, that we are all participants in a drama whose scope extends far beyond our individual lives, and whose resolution depends on our willingness to align ourselves with truth, justice, and love. As we prepare to emerge from the depths of the underworld and return our attention to the realm of the living, we carry with us the sobering recognition that the judgments we will face after death are really reflections of the judgments we make during life, that the weighing of the heart in Osiris's court simply reveals the true weight of choices we make every day in our encounters with family, friends, strangers, and ourselves. But we also carry with us the hopeful knowledge that justice and love are not human inventions, but cosmic principles, that the universe itself supports and rewards those who align themselves with truth and compassion, that the struggles we face in trying to live good lives are not futile exercises, but participation in the fundamental work of creation itself. The journey through the underworld leads inevitably back toward the light, back toward the world, where Ra continues his eternal battle against the forces of chaos, back toward the recognition that the cosmic dramas played out in the realm of the gods are also the intimate dramas of every human heart, every human choice, every human life. In the deepening night, as we follow the path that leads from the judgment halls of Osiris back toward the eastern horizon, where Ra prepares for his daily resurrection, we encounter again the terrible beauty of divine power unleashed in anger, the awesome spectacle of cosmic justice operating without restraint or mercy, the reminder that the forces that sustain us are the same forces that can destroy us if we forget our proper relationship to them. The myth of Ra's eye, that fearsome aspect of solar power that was unleashed upon humanity in response to their rebellion and ingratitude, reveals the shadow side of divine benevolence. The recognition that even the most loving authority has limits to its patience. Even the most nurturing power has aspects that can become destructive when pushed beyond endurance. The story begins in a time when humanity had grown complacent in their relationship with the gods, when the regular blessings of sunlight, fertile floods, and abundant harvests had been taken for granted rather than received with gratitude. When mortals began to imagine that they were entitled to divine favor rather than dependent upon divine grace. This gradual shift from gratitude to entitlement, from humility to arrogance, created a dangerous imbalance in the cosmic order. Ra, observing this change in human attitudes from his celestial vantage point, felt the weight of disappointment and frustration that comes to any parent or authority figure who watches those under their care reject the very principles that ensure their welfare and happiness. The ingratitude and rebellion of humanity was not just a personal insult to Ra, but a threat to the cosmic order itself. For if mortals could ignore divine authority with impunity, the entire structure of existence might collapse into chaos. The decision to unleash the eye of Ra upon rebellious humanity was not made in haste or anger, but after long deliberation, as a last resort, when all other attempts to restore proper relationships had failed. This was not cruel vengeance, but cosmic surgery, the removal of diseased elements that threaten the health of the entire body of creation. The eye of Ra, in the form of the lioness goddess Sekhmet, descended upon the earth with power so terrible that it seemed as if the sun itself had broken free from its ordained path and come to rest directly upon the world, burning everything in its path with the intensity of pure solar energy concentrated into destructive focus. This was not the gentle warmth that nurtures crops and sustains life, but the fierce heat that can turn rivers to steam and reduce mountains to ash. Sekhmet's rampage across the earth reveals the terrifying potential that lies dormant within all nurturing power. The recognition that the same energy that brings life can bring death, that the difference between blessing and curse often lies not in the power itself, but in the relationships and attitudes that determine how that power is received and channeled. The lioness goddess moved through the human world like a force of nature, her claws and teeth finding their mark with supernatural precision, her roar shaking the foundations of cities and causing mountains to tremble, her eyes burning with the concentrated fury of solar energy that had been compressed into the form of perfect predatory power. She was magnificent and terrible, beautiful and deadly, the embodiment of justice operating without restraint or mercy. Yet, as Sekhmet's destruction continued, consuming not just the guilty, but threatening to engulf the innocent as well, Ra began to recognize that divine justice, like any powerful force, requires careful modulation to achieve its intended purpose without causing excessive collateral damage. The Eye of Ra had accomplished its goal of demonstrating divine authority and the consequences of rebellion. But it showed no signs of moderating its fury or distinguishing between degrees of guilt and innocence. The challenge of stopping Sekhmet's rampage reveals one of the deepest insights in Egyptian mythology, that destruction, once unleashed, develops a momentum of its own and becomes difficult to control even by those who initially commanded it. Divine power, when expressed in its purest form, can become as dangerous to its wielders as to its targets, requiring wisdom and restraint to prevent it from consuming everything in its path. The solution to this crisis required not force, which would have been futile against such concentrated divine power, but cleverness and understanding of the deeper patterns that govern both destruction and creation. The other gods recognized that Sekhmet's bloodlust could not be stopped through direct confrontation, but might be redirected through more subtle means, through strategies that honored her nature while limiting her destructive impact. The famous ruse involving beer-colored red to resemble blood reflects the Egyptian understanding that even the most terrible forces can be managed through wisdom and creativity, that destruction can be channeled into less harmful directions without being directly opposed or suppressed. By offering Sekhmet something that satisfied her bloodthirsty nature without requiring actual destruction, the gods found a way to preserve both divine dignity and human survival. As Sekhmet drank the disguised beer, believing it to be the blood of her victims, she gradually became intoxicated and her rage began to subside, her terrible focus softening into confusion and eventually into sleep. This transformation from destroyer to slumbering goddess represents the way that even the most destructive energies eventually exhaust themselves if they are not continuously fed by the attitudes and actions that originally summoned them. The awakening of Sekhmet from her intoxicated sleep marked her transformation from the Eye of Destruction into Hathor, goddess of love, music, and joy, revealing the profound Egyptian insight that the same energy that can manifest as terrible destruction can also express itself as creative blessing, that the difference lies not in the essential nature of the power, but in the circumstances and relationships that determine its expression. This transformation suggests that the forces we fear and try to avoid in our lives may actually be the same energies that, properly understood and channeled, could become sources of tremendous blessing and creativity. The rage that can destroy relationships might be redirected into passion for justice. The intensity that can burn bridges might become the fire that forges new possibilities. The power that can tear down might be the same power that can build up. The myth of Ra's Eye serves as both warning and promise, reminding us that divine power operates according to principles that we ignore at our peril, but also revealing that even the most terrible consequences of our failures and rebellions can potentially be transformed into opportunities for growth, healing, and renewed relationship with the forces that govern our existence. The annual flooding of the Nile, which the ancient Egyptians associated with Ra's tears of remorse over the near destruction of humanity, becomes a symbol of the way that divine justice and mercy work together to create conditions for renewal and restoration. The floodwaters that could be destructive if not properly managed become the source of Egypt's fertility and prosperity when they are received with wisdom and gratitude. in the gentle lapping of Nile waters against the ancient quays, in the gradual retreat of floodwaters, leaving behind rich deposits of fertile silt, in the patient work of farmers preparing their fields for planting. The ancient Egyptians saw reflected the pattern of destruction and renewal that governs all existence, the recognition that endings can become beginnings, that apparent defeats can be transformed into victories, that even divine wrath can become the foundation for deeper understanding and stronger relationships. The story of Ra-Si reminds us that we live always under the gaze of powers greater than ourselves, powers that care deeply about how we conduct our lives and relationships, powers that will intervene when necessary to maintain cosmic balance and justice. But it also assures us that these powers are not arbitrary or cruel, that they prefer mercy to judgment, creation to destruction, harmony to conflict. As we move through the final stages of our journey into Egyptian mythology, following the path that leads from the terror of divine judgment back toward the possibility of cosmic reconciliation and renewed harmony, we carry with us the sobering recognition that our choices matter not just to ourselves, but to the entire fabric of existence, that we are accountable not just to human law, but to cosmic principle. Yet we also carry the hopeful knowledge that the same forces that can judge and punish are also capable of forgiveness and restoration, that the universe itself yearns for harmony rather than conflict, for creation rather than destruction, for love rather than hatred, and that every step we take toward alignment with these cosmic preferences brings us closer to the kind of existence that the ancient myths promised to those who learned to live in proper relationship with the divine powers that govern all life. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the battle between Ra and Sopophis reaches its climax, and the outcome of another cosmic day hangs in the balance, when the souls of the dead await judgment in the halls of Osiris and the living prepare for whatever challenges the new day might bring, we find ourselves returning to the timeless wisdom that these ancient stories were created to preserve and transmit. The myths of Ra, Osiris, and Isis are not merely entertaining tales from a distant past, but living wisdom that speaks to the eternal questions that face every human being in every generation. How should we live? What do we owe to each other and to the powers greater than ourselves? How can we find meaning and purpose in a world where suffering and injustice seem to triumph over love and truth? What happens when we die, and how should this knowledge influence the way we live? Under the vast canopy of the Egyptian night, where the same stars that guided the ancient pharaohs continue their eternal dance across the heavens, where the desert wind carries whispers of prayers offered by countless generations of believers, where the Nile flows with the same patient persistence that has marked its passage for millennia, we find ourselves connected to a tradition of wisdom that transcends the boundaries of time and culture. These stories remind us that we are not alone in our struggles with mortality and meaning, that the questions that keep us awake in the darkest hours of night have been asked by every generation of human beings, that the answers discovered by the ancient Egyptians in their myths and rituals continue to offer guidance and comfort to those who seek to understand their place in the cosmic order. The figure of Ra, fighting his nightly battle against the forces of chaos, speaks to everyone who has struggled to maintain hope and purpose in the face of seemingly overwhelming obstacles, who has felt the weight of responsibility for bringing light into dark places, who has discovered that the greatest victories often require the greatest sacrifices, the sorrow of loss, the challenge of rebuilding after devastating setbacks, the slow work of transforming defeat into victory through patience, love, and unwavering commitment to truth and justice. The tale of Isis, gathering the scattered pieces of her beloved and restoring him through the power of magic born from love, speaks to everyone who has ever faced the task of healing what seemed permanently broken, of restoring what appeared irretrievably lost, of believing in the possibility of resurrection when all evidence pointed toward final defeat. Even the figure of Set in all his destructive fury serves as a reminder that the forces of chaos and disruption are not external enemies, but aspects of existence that must be understood and integrated rather than simply opposed, that the shadows within ourselves and our world can be transformed into sources of strength and wisdom if we approach them with courage and understanding rather than fear and denial. As the first hints of dawn begin to appear on the eastern horizon, as Ra prepares for another victory over the forces of darkness, as the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all existence prepares to complete another revolution, we find ourselves filled with gratitude for the wisdom that these ancient stories have preserved for us across the centuries. But their influence remains woven into the fabric of human consciousness, embedded in the deep structures of meaning that give shape and purpose to human existence. The myths of ancient Egypt continue to live not as historical artifacts, but as living wisdom, not as primitive superstitions, but as sophisticated insights into the nature of reality and our proper relationship to it. In the growing light of dawn, as the sounds of awakening life begin to replace the deep silence of the desert night, as the eternal dance between light and darkness prepares to begin another day, whose meaning encompasses not just our personal struggles and victories, but the entire project of existence itself. The stories of Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Set remind us that we are not merely accidental arrangements of matter and energy, but conscious participants in a universe that cares about consciousness. Not merely biological organisms struggling for survival, but spiritual beings whose choices and commitments contribute to the ongoing creation of reality itself. Monuments that still stand as testimony to the power of human vision and divine inspiration. We find ourselves renewed in our understanding of what it means to be human in a universe governed by powers greater than ourselves, yet accessible to our deepest aspirations and highest commitments. But in the restoration of order, not in the victory of death, but in the persistence of life. And in this ending that is also a beginning, in this darkness that gives birth to light, in this silence that prepares for new songs, we find the essence of what the ancient Egyptians discovered in their myths, and what we can still discover in them today, that existence itself is a story of resurrection, that love is stronger than death, that truth will ultimately prevail over falsehood, and that every ending contains within itself the seeds of a new beginning. The desert wind that carries our voices into the vastness of space and time also carries with it the accumulated wisdom of all those who have gazed up at these same stars and wondered about their place in the cosmic order, all those who have told and retold these stories around countless fires in countless places. May these stories continue to live in your heart as you navigate your own journey through the alternating seasons of light and darkness, joy and sorrow, hope and despair that mark every human life. The patience to perform your own works of restoration and healing, and the faith to believe that your individual story is part of a larger narrative that leads ultimately toward light, love, and the triumph of all that is good and true and beautiful in existence. In the silence that follows the last word of the last story, in the peace that settles over the landscape as night gives way to day, in the deep contentment that comes from connection with wisdom that transcends time and culture, we rest in the knowledge that we are not alone, that we are part of a community that includes not only the living but the dead, not only humans but gods, not only the present moment but all the moments that have ever been and all that ever will be. The eternal night of Egypt continues in the depths of our own souls, where the same battles between light and darkness, order and chaos, love and fear play out in the quiet hours when we face ourselves honestly and choose who we will become. The myths that began under the stars of the ancient world continue under the stars that shine tonight, and they will continue as long as human beings seek meaning, purpose, and connection with the sacred mysteries that govern existence itself. Sleep well, knowing that you too are part of this eternal story, that your dreams and hopes and struggles matter to the cosmic order, that the choices you make contribute to the ongoing creation of a universe where love can triumph over hatred, where justice can prevail over oppression, where truth can overcome falsehood, and where every individual consciousness is a sacred flame in the vast temple of existence.